Okay, we're going to talk about CSV files. And CSV files are comma I try to remember now how to spell separated. Is it it's AER, isn't it? So separated values. And what that essentially means is it is like a plain text file, but then we have what is called a delimiter. Maybe RE, no, it's ER. A delimiter. And a delimiter is a character that defines the end / start of a new value. So what I mean by that is if I wanted to, so let's say I have some fruit, so apple, pear, or pending deprecation warning, apparently, pear and orange, and I wanted these to be comma separated. What I would do, I mean, new lines work as well, and we'll get to that in a minute, but generally we would then just have them all on one line with commas separating them from each other. And then when we pass this value, which means to like process and break it down ready to be used, the program will know that every time we see a comma, that is when the next value would start. So to illustrate that, I'm going to make a new file, and I'm going to call it fruit.csv, and CSV comma separated value files end with .csv. And I'm going to take this, so I'm going to cut it and paste it over here. And you'll see that VS Code has done this nice thing where it color codes things for me, so we can see where each new value is. And we have apple, pear, orange. So we need to load that in. And to do that with Python, we are going to import CSV. So similar to something we've talked about before is random. So similar to the random module, CSV is built into Python, but it's not included in the namespace or like in every script by default because it's not always needed. It's not needed more often than it is. So that's why we have to import it specifically to say that we want to use it. And we are now going to learn about a new type of, it's not a function, it's like an indentation block, and that is a with block. Okay. So I'm going to write this code out first, and then we'll go through it afterwards. But at least we'll get the whole thing in, and then we can see exactly what is going on. So actually, we don't need a new line yet. Okay, and then for row in reader. Let's just print the row. Print row. Okay, so unless I've made some mistake here, when I run this code, we should see the output of our file. We do. So you see we have apple, pear, and orange. So let's go from the top here. So we have our with block. Okay, so with takes there's two parts to the statement. So we say with, and then we give it something. So in this case, we are using this built-in function, similar to like input or print. We have a built-in function for Python called open. And if we hover on that, it doesn't actually have, oh, it does, we just have to scroll. So open a file and return the stream. So instead of returning the content, it returns a stream, which it means the content is accessible from a stream. It doesn't really matter. You'll see how to use it. Doesn't matter why. so with this as CSV file. So this reads quite nicely because we're saying that what the return value of this, so whatever this gives us back, we're going to call that CSV file. And then we're using our comma, similar to like a function. So we say that all this stuff here that's at this indentation, this belongs to this. So from here onwards, during this indentation only, CSV file exists and it belongs to this. So if I came outside of this block and then I tried to print CSV file, it does work, but it wouldn't actually, I don't think it would actually work. I think it would, it does work. Oh, my apologies. Well, I'll explain why you shouldn't do that anyway in a minute. But anyway, so we have CSV file. This now exists. And now we're going to use our import statement. So where we imported CSV, so we're going to use a function from CSV called reader. So we've got our CSV file and we're passing it to the CSV reader. And that gives us, I've called this reader, you can call it whatever you want. This now gives us something called reader. And the reader itself is an iterable data type. So that's why here I've got a loop and I'm going over it one at a time. But essentially this reader object, let's print this directly actually. If I print reader, you see it's just it doesn't give us the values directly because where it's an iterable, it means it contains data. So that's why we have to do for row in reader. But we can call row whatever we want, but I'm just calling it row because that's what it is. But the reader itself, that is the content of the file. So just because I think that got away from me a little bit, just to sum that up. So we are saying that with this file, so this is the name of the file over here that I created. So with this as CSV file, so that's the CSV file, I'm creating a reader, and that's being created from csv.reader, and we're passing the file to it. And now we have this reader object that contains our data. Okay. So you'll see that in that print statement, it's a list. And the reason for that is these are all on the same row. So let's start a new row. And on here, we're going to have banana. Carrot isn't a fruit, but I'm running out of I'm running out of fruit names apparently. That's something to reflect on. And lettuce. Wow, I really am out of fruit names. Okay, so now I've got two rows. So let's run this again. And you'll see now the first time, so because it's a loop, so we're printing each row one row at a time. We got apple, pear, orange, and then we got banana, carrot, lettuce. So each row is its own list. So I think if we print the type of what this row is, it should say a list. Yes, these are lists. Okay, so how do we load in more complex data? So something more akin to let's say an Excel spreadsheet. So the way we do that is we want to define columns. So CSVs don't really let us do columns because all it knows is what separates values and lines from each other. But what we can do is we can use the first line as the column titles, and then we can just interpret that within Python. So let's get rid of the fruit here. Actually, let's make a new file because the name fruit isn't really appropriate for this example. So I'm going to say new file, and I'm going to call it customers.csv. Okay. So let's say we want the first name, last name, and date of birth. So first name can be John Smith, and he was born on the 1st of January 1990. And then we'll have Jane Doe, and let's say she was born on Christmas, because Christmas apparently, 1994. Okay. So if this was a spreadsheet, imagine now, so we have our rows, we have 1, 2, 3, but now imagine these are columns. So we have our column A, which is our white, and then in blue we have column B, and then in this yellow we have column C. We want to bring those into Python, and we want to be able to differentiate these. We want to be able to say that, or understand that Smith is a last name, or that the 25th of December 1994 is a date of birth. So to do that, we have to load the file in a different way. So first, over here, I'm going to say that instead of opening fruit, we are opening customers.csv. And you'll see as well, it's important that the file we are currently opening is in the same directory, it exists at the same place as the file we're opening, because otherwise we would have to add like a more complicated path to file, which I don't really want to get into. So just keep it in the same directory for now. So customers.csv as CSV file. And now instead of saying csv.reader, we are going to do csv. And then because it's a dictionary, we have a different function called dictReader. So we have we're declaring the reader here, and then we're saying for row in reader, print row. So let's try that. And doesn't this look different? So whereas before we were seeing these lists, so apple, pear, etc. You can see here I was playing with some stuff before. We now have dictionaries. So I'm going to print the type. Let's print the type, and we have class dict, so dictionaries. What that means is that we can use the keys. So if I want to print the keys, and it's doing it twice because there's 2 rows and it's doing it each time, but we have first name, last name, and date of birth, which is exactly what we want. So that means that on each iteration, so instead of saying for row in read, let's make this more clear. So let's say customers. So we're going to say that this file is called customers. So we're saving it to a variable called customers. And then for customer in customers, so we're looping over all of the customers, I want to print the customer, and I'm going to pass it the key first name. And now what this means is that on the first loop, we should see John, and then we should see Jane. So if I run this, John and then Jane. And then we can go one step further, and we can do last name, and then we can do date of birth. And boom, we have John Smith, 1st January 1990, Jane Doe, 25th 12th 1994. So just like that, we now have a more complicated data set. So this means that instead of if we're writing a script or something, and we might be up here declaring, some data equals this, and then, we're passing this around and doing whatever. Like we don't have to write. We don't have to. It's called hard coding, which is writing, like dynamic, or what should probably be dynamic data within the script itself. We can pull it in from an external source. So here, yeah, file path, that dict reader is used for dictionaries, and boom, we've got our customers. So a bit of good practice here might be, let's say I want to write a script down here which does something with this data, or I have several spreadsheets I might want to, or CSV files I want to read from. Let's make a function, and let's call it load dictionary, load data from CSV. Oh, actually no, that's not. Let's do create dictionary from CSV. Let's give it a path, and we'll leave it blank because we always need a path. There's no sensible default for that. And then we can indent this to add it there. So with open, instead of customers.csv, we want the path. And I'm saying path because in computer like file system hierarchy terminology, we would refer to where a file is as the file's path. So in the context of my computer here, for example, you can see the file path is actually listed all the time. So we have the C drive, because this is a Windows computer and we tend to put things in, the main drive is called C by default. So we have C/users, jack M, app data, local, blah, blah, blah. And then over here, C, users, jack, documents, Python. That's where we actually are. So that's I think, where Python lives, but this is where the files are. So that's the full file path. But we only need to give it the path relative to where we are now. So that's why I can just give it customers.csv, and it will just look in the current folder. But that's why that's called path. That's just a computer term. So with open path as CSV file, customers equal, this can be a little bit more dynamic. So we could say data equals that. And I mean, we don't actually need to do anything with it there. We could probably, you know what? We can probably just return this as it is. We don't need to name it anything. Boom. Got ourselves a nice little helper function. So now down here, I've got a script, and I want to say, you know, what's our goal? We want to print all customers' first names. So I'm going to say customers equals, and I forgot what I called. Was it called create dictionary from CSV, which is customers.csv, and then for customer in customers, print customer first name. And boom, little helper function means getting all our customers and seeing what their first names are. If I write my file correctly, what happened here? IO operation on file close. Okay, I've done a bit of reading, and I think what I've done here is this isn't a list by default, is it? If I print the type, so print, and then that's wrapped in brackets of print type. I'll just get rid of that, get rid of that. Okay, and then we're calling the function down here, so if I run it, it should work. So you'll see here the class is csv.dictReader, and we actually want to return the list. So that's why we were iterating over it before with this for blah, blah, blah. So what I'll do is we will return, and we will wrap it in a function to ensure that it is a list. Let's see, does that work? That now works. There you go. So everyone, even myself, after many years of doing this, we encounter stupid errors like this. And the reason for that is there's too much to remember. Next to this window, I have the documentation up for the CSV module, and you will always have to refer to these things because it's not reasonable to expect that you can remember all of the syntax and how things are written like this. You don't do it often enough, in my opinion. You'll always either need your own examples of where you've done it in the past, or you will need the documentation open. I recommend using documentation because it will be up to date, whereas if I looked at examples where I've done this 5 or 6 years ago, the syntax might have changed since then. So, but yeah, that's why. So we have to make sure that this is actually a list, and the reason for that is that I think this is dependent on the file itself, or it was having this error of closing a stream, value error, IO operation on closed file. That's why. So essentially, because we were passing out the dict reader, that means that it reads the file live as you use this object directly. So when we were looping over it, we were actually reading the file in that instant. But then by converting it to a list here, we are converting the values from that file into a list, and that means it now lives independently in our script as its own thing. And then we're returning that. And the reason it caused this IO operation, IO is an in-out operation, which essentially means reading or writing data. So that can be whether you're fetching something from the internet or from a local file. We were having this IO operation on closed file because we were outside of this with statement. And I said I'd mention why the with statement is important for files, and the reason is that the file is only open while you're in this indentation. And as soon as you exit this indentation, the file closes. And that's super important, because if we are writing information to the file and then our script gets interrupted, or we do just something wacky out of nowhere, or something doesn't complete, the file can get broken because it's being closed with incomplete data. So we use a with statement to make sure that the file is automatically closed correctly and safely when we're done with it. So I feel like, just to make sure that's super clear then, the reason we got this error is because while we were just using csv.dictReader, it was trying to read the information from the file in that moment. But because we were doing that outside of the with statement, because I'd returned the value down here, the file had been closed, which is what we want to happen. So that's why I instead here, I convert it to a list, and then I return that list, because the list lives within the script itself, whereas this was directly reading the file. So now jumping back down here, we now have a list of customers, and on each row is a dictionary which has the first name and last name and date of birth. So if I, instead of printing each one at a time, let's just print the customers, and you'll see we have 2 items in it, both are dictionaries, both have the same keys, and these correlate to the file here. So that's 2 variations of how you read CSV files. It is also possible to have like 3-dimensional CSV files where you might have the first column being a title in itself, but we'll leave that for now, because when you get into multi-dimensional dictionaries, it gets even more confusing. But there's your quick introduction. So if you have any scripts or things that you are working on for your learning which is using data that's hard-coded in the script, I would like to challenge you to take that data out of the script and load it in externally. And then when you're looking at the script itself, you should be trying to tailor it to be dynamic and to allow a multitude of different types of data to come into it. So you want to try and make it so that your script can load in the data and it can handle incorrect data. Because, for example, now, if I did print customers, let's print the first customer's first name. First name, if I can type correctly. See, it works. But then, if I got rid of this key and now it's called name, we get that error of key doesn't exist. So data can be less reliable when it's external, so you need to have extra rigidity and exception handling in your scripts to make sure that things all exist. So there's a good challenge for you, and hopefully that was all nice and clear.